was in my early formative teenage years, there were probably two cars more than any other that distracted me and interested me most. One was the McLaren F1. The other was the Lotus Elise. And this is the Lotus Elise with a little bit of McLaren F1 in its engine bay.
This is the SuperSport from Analogue Automotive. Through some painstaking restoration and modernisation, it aims to take the fabulous Series 1 Elise that Lotus developed 30 years ago and elevate it to the next level. But, to paraphrase Shakespeare, is this a case of gilding the lily? If you enjoy this film, then please think about joining the Hagerty Drivers Club. You get a magazine that's definitely not lightweight, and there's 24/7 roadside assistance in case you have a troublesome head gasket. To discover all the benefits, just click on the link in the description down below. The engine in the first Elise produced just 118 horsepower, but thanks to a redesigned block for better heat management, revised cams and larger valves in the head, plus individual throttle bodies with carbon trumpets and a new ECU, this has rather more.
This Elise now has 210 brake horsepower, but the thing I love is that they haven't gone down some sort of turbocharging forced induction route. This is still a naturally aspirated K Series engine. It sounds fabulous, with its individual throttle bodies matched to a Quaife quick shift kit and close ratios, so second, third and fourth have been changed.
There's also a lightweight flywheel, a Quaife ATB limited slip diff and motorsport driveshafts. But, as you've probably noticed, it's not just the drivetrain that's been altered on this car.
When I first saw the SuperSport, I could have sworn that it had wider bodywork, but as you can see, it doesn't. It's just a sort of trick of the eye. So this does have wider tracks, so they fill the arches that much better, 30mm wider at the front. Also, you can see quite significantly lower ride height, 25mm lower compared to an original S1. There are a couple of other little things as well. The removal of the fog lights, which in fact this one has had already, and I think these smoked inner lenses here all just help to widen it visually, even if physically it's exactly the same width. At the back, the track has been increased by 20mm, so not quite as much as at the front, but it does remain wider overall at the rear. Visually, the trick they've used is switching these two lights around. Just having the brake lights on the outside makes it look that little bit wider. Otherwise, the bodywork remains exactly the same, apart from this rear wing, which is actually from the Sport 160.
The Sport 160 followed on from the Sport 135, but there were some really extreme Series 1 Elises.
The first one that I remember, because weirdly my dentist had one, was the Sport 190 VHPD, which stands for Very High Performance Derivative, and puts out, yes, 190 PS from its K Series engine. It had other cool things like mismatched seats with a big Corbo bucket for the driver and then the standard one for the passenger. There was also a cross brace in the cabin, and it had the yellow Coney dampers signifying Lotus Sport suspension. Then there was the 340R with this amazing single piece of bodywork over the top, no roof, no side windows, but the same VHPD engine as that Sport 190. Finally, and perhaps most intriguingly of all, was the Motorsport Elise, which came just before the Series 1 Exige. And that was interesting because it shared something in common with the McLaren F1 as well. A single, central driver's seat.
On paper, this SuperSport is even more extreme, weighing even less than a 340R at under 680 kilos or 1,500 pounds, while putting out 210 brake horsepower at the wheels and 160 pounds-feet of torque.
But the super impressive thing about this is just how tractable it is, how linear it is. This is not an engine that's really peaky. You might think it would be all up the top end of the rev range and quite hard to access, but you can cruise around in the mid-range relying on that torque, which makes it feel like a really usable, enjoyable car on the road. The standard gear shift in an Elise was never one of its strong points, and in this as well, it just Takes a little bit of care. It's not the slickest or most precise gear shift you'll ever encounter by any stretch of the imagination.
The fettled PG1 box is definitely better in the SuperSport, but can still feel a little reluctant in its engagement compared to the best snickety manuals. Nothing wrong with the pedals though, which remain as beautiful as ever.
In terms of the chassis, well, this has got the wider tracks, Nitron Clubsport dampers on it, and obviously it's been lowered quite a bit. And you look at it from the outside and you think, I'm not sure that's going to work on the road, and will it have destroyed the famed Lotus ride quality? And well, yes, this is obviously firmer. It still rides and copes with a bumpy road like this really well. The steering is weightier, but you still get that lovely sense of the car moving with cambers, that little bit of almost float over the road surface. So although it feels like a much tougher, more connected car, a more positive car, it still feels like an Elise.
The SuperSport actually has a quicker rack and lightweight steering arms as well, and after a while it struck me that the weighting of the wheel was very reminiscent of a distant relation, a Caterham 7. Perhaps it's something in the water, because like Caterham, Analogue Automotive is based in the south of England. It was founded by Steffen Dobke, who, after we'd talked about mountain bikes, showed me around his new premises.
With the full build, like the SuperSport over here, where do you start?
Typically it starts, we'll source and supply a donor car. I mean, we could also use a car that someone has. It doesn't have to be an immaculate, low mileage, showroom car. We can have anything up to 100,000 miles, whatever. It just means the chassis we need to suspect it and make sure the chassis is nice and clean. And then from then, we do a full strip down, almost to this standard. So we'll strip it down to what we call a bare tub. Obviously the side sills and screen surround are bonded on from factory. And when you bought a repaired chassis, if you needed to back in the day, they don't do them anymore, it would come in pretty much this state. So we get it down, attend to any dissimilar metal issues. There are a few key corrosion spots, so we sort those out. Anything that's steel, subframe gets sent off. We modify the subframe.
So it's slightly stiffer.
Slightly stiffer, nothing major, just a few extra bits of welding, some seam welding, a small stiffening bar that just stiffens it up a fraction without adding too much weight. And then we have our own unique wishbones, either the standard or wide track, depending on what spec you go for. And then we will clean it up with a special process we've got to get the chassis as good as new.
Then it's paint on the panels, new wishbones fitted, long or standard, and of course that gold in the engine bay.
And what sits here is obviously the K Series engine.
Yes, yeah.
And do I dare mention head gaskets?
Head gasket. I was thinking of having a t-shirt made up with just HGF on the back. But
it's not a thing anymore, is it?
No, it's not. When we first started this, we were doing head gaskets on I wouldn't say daily, but a weekly basis. It was a common occurrence. Things have changed, head gaskets have changed, the way engines are built are a better standard. So now we can reliably get 200, 210 horsepower out of it.
And it's fundamentally such a good, it sounds great, but it's also, it's small, it's light,
it's
isn't it?
It's a great little design. So yeah, I've looked at other engines, I've had other engine Elises in the past, but we're trying to, particularly with some of these being exported to places that didn't have the S1, keeping the original chassis and engines quite important. For those legal reasons to get it into other countries. The US got the 25-year rule. So we're just trying to refine what is there and make it as strong and as reliable, and then you get all the benefits of it really was quite a good design in the first place.
After you've seen the months and months of work that go into a full build, it's easy to see why a SuperSport will cost over £100,000, a point that we'll come back to in a moment. But while we're talking about the K Series, I thought I should mention that to finish off the engine, Steffen specs a full large bore stainless steel exhaust, this one finished in Cerakote.
What a sound! Just occasionally you'll get what they dub the sonic boom of this car. Mini explosion. The other acoustic novelty to this is actually, well, a slight absence of noise, because normally you get an Elise and there are all sorts of rattles really from the under tray. But this, none of it. It feels so tight together.
I really like the fact that although it's been fastidiously lightened, it has also had little bits of weight added back in where absolutely necessary, like some strategically placed sound deadening or that stiffening in the rear subframe. Elsewhere inside the cabin of this development demonstrator, there is a smattering of carbon, a new handbrake, a better, lighter heater system, and of course the new Tillet carbon bucket seats, a definite improvement on the originals in terms of lateral support.
The buttons, which were originally from a Peugeot 205, have been swapped out as well. I'm actually glad that they've left the original stack instruments in here, because I was always a fan of those with their orange hands.
Very Ultraman. There is apparently a digital dash in development, but this analog one, well, seems somehow appropriate. Other than that, there's not much to mention inside. No radio, no cup holders, no distractions.
I adore the simplicity of this car. With modern cars, there's so often something to fiddle with, to adjust. With this, you just get on with it. And there's something really liberating about that. The simplicity of this interior is matched by the simplicity of the driving experience, and I mean that in a very good way.
Naturally, that Spartan philosophy applies to all Series 1 Elises, not just this one. And while this SuperSport is a halo car for Analogue Automotive, there will be less pricey options. And the company also does restoration, servicing and upgrading. It's really not all about the big bucks builds.
Obviously, the full build it's a lot of money, there's no two ways about it. And it's one of the things people always say, oh, it's an awful lot for an Elise. And I remember one of the things that appealed to me was the original S1 was wonderfully affordable. It was about £18,000 when it was launched, which is amazing. And they're still a relatively affordable sports car now on the second-hand market. So if somebody's looking at it and going, oh, I'd love it, but I can't afford that, but I can afford an Elise, but I'd like a bit of this in it. If they came to you, like, I want to make an upgrade, I want to get a bit of this in my car, what would be the first thing you'd say they should do?
The cornerstone of that car was the suspension and everything we've learned over the years. There are some adaptations with the wide track, but suspension has got to be that's what an Elise has always been known for. It's what it's been used as a reference to in when car tests, it drives like an Elise, handles like an Elise. So suspension, and from twofold really. One, they're 25 years old. A lot of them are running around with the original bushes on there. The steel wishbones tend to corrode. That can then start eating in, if left long enough, into the chassis, so it can be a sort of a big issue. So suspension work, make sure that's all up and together, get your car handling like an Elise should do. That's the main thing. Don't worry about, people worry about the fiberglass bodywork. That can be fixed if the suspension goes too far, or it's been damaged, or it's been crashed. So an inspection, a suspension restoration or rebuild is definitely number one.
And what about the handling of this car, with its wider tracks, larger adjustable front anti-roll bar and Nitron Clubsport dampers?
The driving sensation in this is one that, well, it gives you more confidence to really push it. You can drive it on the power much more. We've got an ATB Quaife limit slip diff in the back of this, and you can really get stuck in on the throttle, where a standard Elise wants you to be precise, and it can be a little bit prescriptive in how it wants to be driven. This lets you roll your sleeves up and get stuck in. It will move around a little bit more. It's actually a little bit more forgiving. You can really use the extra power in this, balance it on the throttle, and there's a surprising amount of grip. These Yokohama Nova tyres are really good. It's obviously pretty damp today. We've still got a lot of traction, and although the steering in this is definitely weightier, it absolutely hasn't robbed it of any feel. And I love the fact that it's still just little inputs that you need. Because this sits lower and it has the wider tracks, it just has better control of its weight transfers, which gives you more confidence. You can lean into the grip more quickly, more easily in corners. You can have faith in loading that front end, and you know that the rear isn't going to get horribly unruly on you.
So, more control, particularly at the rear, but still with a ride that won't rattle your teeth. And talking of dentistry...
Now, I do actually have a tube of toothpaste here, because there's a famous post that it crops up on all the forums, isn't it? And it's beautifully done, actually. It's beautifully written about, if somebody asks, are the chassis going to come unstuck? is the glue not going to last? And somebody wrote a beautiful thing about it's fine as long as during winter you cover it up with toothpaste. Not the high fluoride ones, obviously, because that would be terrible.
Ridiculous.
But it is a hoax, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Good.
No.
Good.
It's off the back of the different glues and the bonding on the chassis, which, funnily enough, Lotus, I don't think they gave it very many years, maybe 10 years from memory, something like that. But that's how long they'd sort of guarantee the chassis. And here we are, 25, almost knocking on 30. And the chassis, once they're cleaned up and there isn't any damage to them, are probably the strongest part of the car. It's the rusty wishbones and all the steel parts that weren't finished very well that we have to sort of replace. But there is also a difference between the
two different colour glues, aren't there?
Yeah.
'Cause that's obviously orange.
That's an orange
here,
glue.
and then the sort of the bluey green one here.
Yeah, so that denotes the very first Elises were green glued card, or the chassis were, and that was because they were made in Denmark. And then the later cars, once the Hethel took over production of the chassis, they went to the orange.
So it was Hydro was the company,
That's
wasn't
it.
it?
Yeah. So
And one of the things, because it's hard to sort of work out what's true and what isn't in this sort of world, but are the green ones actually lighter?
yes, so the launch cars, which were early green glue cars, were the sort of 699, sort of sub 700 kilo cars. But even there's tiny little differentiations between a sort of 96, and that blue one there's really early. I think it's about the 40th car off the production line. Between an early 96 to a 97 car, there's even tiny little minute details in the chassis and the way the bulkhead's ever so slightly different. And then the clams change, the boot changes. So even within an S1 from 96 to 99 does have minute changes between them. So with our super light, which is going to be the lightest version we can probably make, we'll start with a green glued car and build it from that, because there are a number of reasons to do that, because it is the lightest one to start with.
But none of them come in spelling of mint.
None of the toothpaste needed yet. You can keep that.
Okay.
Good to have that all cleared up, I think. And what about the SuperSport? Are the changes a case of gilding refined gold, of painting the lily? Well, no. For a start, so much of this build is simply about preserving and prolonging the life of the wonderful original car. Things that any Series 1 Elise owner would love to do. And then there's the fact that it is brilliant to drive. It trades a bit of the original's delicacy but none of the feel, and the payoff is a car that you can chuck around more confidently. Handling wise, it's a bit like the Alpine A110R is to the standard A110. Both have their own character and place. In fact, given its similar price, you might conceivably pitch the SuperSport against an 1100 kilo A110R.
But this is an awful lot lighter than that. That is a lightweight car by modern standards, but this is so much lighter. And then you think, well, perhaps you should compare it to things like Caterhams and Ariel Atoms, because they're in the same sort of ballpark in terms of curb weight. But the brilliance of the Elise has always been that it's felt that much more approachable than those cars, more usable.
It remains an incredible blend of the purist and just a little bit practical. All these years on, the magic conjured up by Rackham, Thompson, Shute et al. At Lotus remains. There is nothing quite like an Elise.
Sitting low in this aluminium tub, that sort of Group C racer vibe to the view out. I love the Elise. 30 years on since they started developing this. It still feels just so special. This and a McLaren F1. Yeah. I think I had it right as a teenager.